Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Cadet 3rd Class Tusajikwa Owens. It is my privilege to welcome you to this session of the 31st Annual National Character and Leadership Symposium. Our honored guest speaker for this morning's session is Mr. Todd Simmons. Mr. Simmons, a distinguished educator, cultural influencer, international keystone speaker, and accomplished business leader, is renowned for his unwavering commitment to fostering a society of courageous leaders. As a Courageous Leadership Alliance founder, he has dedicated his career to building a coalition of change agents who share a common vision to empower individuals and organizations with the tools needed to thrive in the ever-evolving landscape of leadership. With a diverse career, Mr. Simmons is a 25-year Air Force veteran. He is a retired Chief Master Sergeant who has left an indelible mark on global institutions and businesses alike. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce Mr. Todd Simmons.
Good afternoon. I don't know how it feels to be the last speaker of the day. You know, I could have sworn we were talking, and I got my amazing security team here that's been with me the last 2 days. I was going over some stuff, and I was like, I remember distinctly saying that I'm not an after-lunch speaker. But I'm honored to be here today, and I'm actually honored to make this my last event here at the last 2 days. You know, it's been about 7 or 8 engagements the last 2 days. It's been full of a lot of reflection, to be honest with you. You know, I don't get an opportunity as often as I would like to be around such great human beings. Such great human beings who are still answering the call, who are still coming here strong every year, who are still leaving a mark. And that's not only the Cadet Corps. That's the retirees in the audience. That's our civilians. That's the professors here. That's anyone who leaves a mark on our national defense. But I want to start off a little bit with a question today. And I'll ask you a couple of questions. But I will tell you, I had a couple of very powerful small group sessions that kind of left a really big mark on me. And yesterday I had a cadet that asked me a question, and he said, how do I remain hopeful? I thought it was one of the most powerful questions that anyone has asked me in a long time. Because prior to that, we had a conversation about our national security and the threats that we have, the wicked issues that we have to face, and what cadets like all of you and what people who are pouring into everyone in this room will have to face for the next 10, 15, 20 years to keep our national security and our national interests where they're at. But he said, how do I remain hopeful? Because I told him a little bit about my personal story, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And he said, how do you remain hopeful? And I will tell you, I'll answer half of that question now, and I'll answer the half at the end. And the first half of it is I remain hopeful because I see young men and women all across this nation still to raise their hands, 4,000 strong in this institution, hundreds of thousands strong across our Air Force, across our Space Force, across our department, that still believe that they can contribute to this way of life that we hold so dear. Regardless if I'm retired or not, that there's always 20 behind me. Regardless if we may have had a recruiting challenge, but it's not the first, the second, the third, or the fourth. But young men and women will continue to defend this nation. That's why I'm hopeful. That what makes me hopeful, and I'll answer the other part later. So, culture, the strategic imperative. And you've heard a lot about culture the last 2 days that you've been here. You've heard a lot of different definitions. You've heard a lot of different ways that we describe it. You've heard a lot of different ways that it can help organizations. You've heard a lot of different stories. I want to start out for the first couple of minutes just giving you what I believe in from more of this view of what I believe culture is, and then I will give you why that strategic imperative of culture is at the forefront of what we should be doing every day. See, it doesn't matter what industry we're in. We've seen the last 5, 6 years, and this is organizations that I've been in the last 18 months, and something that I've educated my own self on is that everyone wants to be valued. That everybody wants to feel like they have a sense of purpose and connected to a mission, that they can believe in. It doesn't matter if that's Walt Disney arguing over who's going to be Mickey Mouse tomorrow. That doesn't matter if it's a squadron that's at the tip of the spear operationally. It doesn't matter if we're here at the Air Force Academy. It does not matter. Today, a human being wants to be recognized for their contribution to what they're doing on behalf of a nation, or organization, or business. So when we talk about organizational culture, what goes into organizational culture? The definition of that is everything. How you showed up today, how you spoke to the person in the Starbucks line, which I would have to say, there's no Starbucks line in the United States of America longer than that Starbucks line. I know I had to take some words back this morning because I know the cadets who were with me, they probably feel like I was real, like, man, this guy's a little bougie. Because I walked in this morning and I said, I'm going to get Starbucks, chai tea latte, 1 Splendor, almond milk. And I said, I'm going to get some, and I saw that line and you offered to stand in line for me. I said, absolutely not. You'll never stand in line for me. That's not the way this rolls. And I said, I'm going to be honest with you. I can't stand in that line if it's more than 6 people. There was actually about 92 people in that line. So I don't know how you do it. So what is culture? Culture is everything. If we were to take all these glass walls around us today and I was to ask each person to write in what they believe culture is based on anything in here, our values, our attitudes, how we show up, you'll come up with 10,000 things around this room. It means so much to all of us. But if in its simplest form, it's just a set of ingredients. Who are my bakers in here? Who loves to bake? Last thing I baked, I almost had a house fire, so don't, You like to bake, ma'am? What do you like to bake? That sounds complicated. Who likes to bake something more simple that I know? She went straight to something that I don't even know the ingredients of, but I love it. So tell me 3 ingredients. Flour and eggs. Let's just go with that, because we're about to get complicated. Basic ingredients for bacon. So if your organizational culture is made up of 1,000 things that we put on the wall, what ingredients do you need for people to show up with a sense of purpose, a sense of cohesion, and a sense of high level of commitment? So if we're going to bake macarons, if we're going to bake those, and I was to ask you to bake one for each member of this audience, could you do that if I gave you the right ingredients? Absolutely, right? So what if I gave you that flour in whatever measurements you needed? What if I gave you the eggs in any measurement that you needed? And by recipe, I gave you everything that you need by measurement. But I'm going to add my own couple of extra ingredients. I'm going to give you some dirt. Could you still bake that? They will taste a little different. It may even look as great as this slice of cake, but the taste may be off. So your ingredients to your organizational culture of these 1,000 things has a recipe. Recipes are written all over the walls of the Air Force Academy. It's written in our core values. It's written in who we should be as human beings. We should instill trust in each other. We should have a culture of inclusion. We should have a culture of innovation and creativity that's only can be led by people who have a high sense of psychological safety. We know those are ingredients to create an optimal culture. But why would we add dirt? Why would we purposely add dirt to make it taste differently? It may look pretty. It may look shiny. It may have all the greatest furniture, the greatest IT, but it tastes different. And as all of you walk through the thresholds of each of your organization, you know what tastes different. You know that what you walk through may look pretty. You know what you walk through may be a great slice or a great dessert, but there's something that's off. So what do you do as leaders when the taste is off? When you know that there's a lower level of trust, there's a lower level of inclusion, there's a lower level of people who can actually look each other in the eye and says, we are here for a sense of purpose with each other. When it's off, what do? That's the question. Because you have to decide, are you in the boat? Are you out the boat? And then when you decide that, how are you going to perform? See, I live in Washington, D.C. Anybody's been to Washington, D.C.? See, everybody should raise their hand, right? Most people. How many people have been stationed in Washington, D.C. or lived in that area? All right. All of you who have your Pentagon tour and you have scars. Okay. That's the group of people in here. So Washington, D.C. is where I live. I love going out on the wharf. In the next month, it's going to be so beautiful in D.C. I love sitting out and just looking out. That's where my recharge comes from. That's why I regenerate myself, sitting out on the wharf. One day I was sitting out on the wharf and I saw Georgetown, as they always do, out there and they're rowing. Anybody that's ever rowed crew? Who's ever rowed crew? That is good, because I'm about to say so many incorrect things about the sport that none of you will be able to catch on. But I was watching this team of young men practice, had a little boat behind them. It was the coach, and they were practicing for whatever meet they had coming up. And they took the boat out of the water, and they came toward me, and I asked a question. I said, hey, I got a question. But the person I asked the question to was 6'2", just like me. He looked different from everyone else. He was the person I went up to because he was muscular. Man, he looked like he came out of Muscle Men's Magazine or something. And I asked him, I said, hey, man, that team will not win without you. Like, you're carrying that team. You're the biggest guy in that boat. I guarantee if you wasn't, hey, man, why doesn't everyone look like you? And he looked at me, and I can see in his eyes, he was saying, you're lucky you got gray hair in your beard, that I would call you some names right now. What he really was saying was, man, does he really believe that? And what he told me, this young man said, it doesn't matter how big I am. It doesn't matter how strong I am. It doesn't matter, even in some instances, how experienced I am at this sport. If I get in this boat and I don't row within 1 millisecond of my other teammates, then we lose. That is the only strategy when I get in the boat, is to row within 1 millisecond with my teammates, and if I don't, the boat doesn't go straight and low in the water. He said, it's not about me. It's about the team being connected to a point that we trust each other, we know each other's strengths, we know how to win. Man, that was profound on me. Because a lot of us get in the boat, and a lot of us start rowing faster than our teammates. We get in the boat, and we start rowing slower than our teammates. And some of us get in the boat, and we stop rowing at all. And as an organization, we won't win. As an organization that's built to protect a way of life that we all so dear, we won't win. Are there times when we need you to row faster? Absolutely. Are there times when we need you to slow down and think about what the process is? Absolutely. But there are many times that we need you to get in the boat and become so connected and so cohesive that you row within 1 millisecond of your team in order to win. Absolutely. Because this intentional effort is about commitment. And I believe commitment starts with connection. No one in that boat got in that boat that day to row, to win, without having some kind of sense of common purpose with each other, some sense of common connection with each other. Do you think they showed up every day and no one knew the last name of this person, that they didn't know this person was from St. Louis, Missouri, that you're from Nebraska, that they weren't connected enough to know that today you may have had a cold that I can't visibly see, but I see that you may not be 100% today? Connection is the fuel and the foundation of anything that will drive culture in your organization. And how many of you signed up for this and you saw the little asterisk at the bottom of the sign-up that said you have to participate? Who saw that? Oh, it was, you saw it, ma'am? You're the only one who read the invitation. And if you didn't see it, we just put it there like 10 minutes ago. No, but I'm going to ask you to participate. Because it's one thing for me to stand here for 45 minutes and speak to you, and it's one other thing for you to take 90 seconds to understand that this is real. So what I want to do is I got a thing we call powerful questions. And if you really knew me, you would know that I'm the world's biggest Alabama fan. Well, go Falcons first. And then I'm the world's biggest Alabama fan. I just need one Roll Tide. Boy, you all get free books at the end. But I am. But if you also knew me, you would know that I'm a high school dropout that became the head senior enlisted leader for education for the Air Force. Now, you can take that two ways. Like the Air Force talent management may be a little suspect, or you can take that as maybe some work happened in between those bookends. I'm not going to ask you to be left or right of that question. I'm going to ask you to make a choice today where you want to be in that question. So I'm going to ask everyone in this beautiful auditorium that I got an opportunity to see when I was stationed here. I'm going to ask everyone to stand. I'm like, oh, you didn't see the participation clause. I'm sorry. And we're going to do this in 90 seconds because I'm on the clock. I want you to pair it with someone, make it in groups of 2 or 3. And I want you to turn to someone, and I want you to use this prompt. If you really knew me, you would know that. And if you pick Alabama as a fan, you get a book. No, I'm just joking. But I want you to practice a little connection and vulnerability. It can be as simple as you really knew me, you would know that, whatever. I'm not telling you to be on the left, I'm not telling you to be in the middle, and I'm not telling you to be on the right or what I said. I'm giving you a choice. So let's do about 90 seconds. One person, and then the next person goes. Ready, go. Awesome. Love the way this looks. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Let's start wrapping it up in about 20 seconds. Let's start wrapping it up in about 20 seconds. All right, let's start finding our seats, which is the hardest part now, to get you to stop talking. All right. How many people did that feel good? Right? How many of us just walk around during the day and become curious about someone who we may even know or not know? Man, curiosity. I'm from the South. I'm originally from a small town called Hardyville, South Carolina. Curiosity is an academic word. In South Carolina, it's called being nosy. So I'm a little bit of the academic and I'm a little bit of the Southerner. But I love learning things. I always ask people, how did you spend the last 10 seconds? So before I walked out here, when you sat down in this seat, what did you do with those 10 seconds with the person sitting next to you? Sometimes we get so, mesmerized in what's going on exterior to us that we don't see what's going on right next to us. And I love using this question, and I've done it with as much as 600 people in the room. And the hardest part is not to get people to talk. The hardest part is to get you to stop talking. But if you needed to do that naturally, you wouldn't do it. We sit next to each other, and we give these very vanilla, how are you doing? And we don't get into any curiosity. I guarantee you with the number of people in this room, there was about 200 new facts established in our human space today. New facts. And if we were to have you change partners every 90 seconds for 5 minutes, you know how connected this room would be? Think about it. 5 minutes. Somebody would have got to somebody that could have been life-changing in their life in 5 minutes. You would have just got to one person who could have changed the whole trajectory of the rest of your life. Who's heard of psychological safety? I cannot talk about culture, and by the way, this is 4 hours of psychological safety in 4 minutes. But I cannot talk about any fundamental changes in culture without talking about the foundation of what culture should be built off of. I started with this term, not the knowledge that comes with this term, back in 2016. Through two great researchers, which I will talk about one today, but Dr. Amy Edmondson is a great person to research the topic a little bit more with. But I came to this term because I was doing a graduate certificate and I had to write a paper, and I used my organization, and I came to the conclusion that my organization was psychologically unsafe, which sounds bad, but it's not. It just means that our culture was not set up for words that we use like innovation and creativity. It meant that we have people who did not show up ready to dive into the riskiest, toughest problems because they felt like it was a risk to them. And that risk can be 1,000 things. So I want to talk about one researcher, Dr. Timothy Clark, talks about there's 4 stages of psychological safety. And what he talks about is that an individual has to go through all 4 of these stages to feel like they can take risks, essentially. Or they can feel safe enough, essentially, to be themselves in the organization from an operationally or personal standpoint. And he talks about these 4 stages of inclusion safety, talks about learner safety, he talks about contributor safety and challenger safety. And if you look and read through each of these, and you said you have to navigate through all 4 of these, I think if we had the time, all of us can come up with a space that we are currently in that could fit into one of these boxes. I like to tell people when I was in the Air Force and at the height of my career, when I was the Air University Command Chief, my inclusion safety was strong as whatever you can measure it to. I felt safe to be myself. I walked into rooms and I felt confident with my 15, 20 years around education at some point to really talk about how we develop airmen, how do we develop officers, NCOs, whatever. I felt comfortable. But then I retired from the Air Force. And I started going in groups where there was not one veteran in the room because I'm a consultant and I'm trying to do this consultancy thing. And I'm in Washington, D.C., the home of world consultants. And I'm in the room and I didn't feel so included. I didn't feel like I can be the veteran. I didn't feel like my now 18 months of experience post-military rivaled this person that's 25 years. So we can move in and out of these things at any point in our life. A lot of the cadets here will achieve great things while they're here at the Air Force Academy. And one thing that I heard over and over and over again kind of falls into this box. When I leave here, how are people going to receive me as a second lieutenant? So you can have the wing commander here at the cadet wing who has achieved great achievements that go now and being second lieutenant in some organization who can revert back to like, I don't feel accepted anymore, and had the highest level of acceptance here. So these things change in our life, dependent upon where we're at. But we shouldn't look at it as a negative because no one is stuck in a box. It's awareness, and how do you get out of this box? Yes, before anyone says, yes, that is the Army picture. And yes, it is the old Army uniform, but I like the picture of it. Signifies a lot of operational things in a point in my career when I worked with the Army. But if I was to ask you a question, where is the most psychologically unsafe place in an organization, what would the answer be? Just yell it out. I'm sorry? Staff meeting. Let me tell you why. And that's probably not a true statement. I'm just picking a staff meeting. Because it's what I did my research on in 2016 in my own organization. I recorded the staff meeting, not recorded on video, but I recorded the staff meeting for 4 months. Who spoke? Who didn't speak? Who really was super nervous when the highest ranking person in the room spoke? Who was confident outside of that room versus inside? So let me tell you what happens in staff meetings that makes a staff meeting. First of all, warning shot, if you got to leave now, if you don't want me to ruin the rest of your staff meetings for the rest of your life. Because what I'm about to say is going to really, 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 really make you really weird in the staff meetings for the rest of your time. How many of you can recognize this from the staff meeting? Staff meeting, bunch of leaders, everyone in there are leaders, everyone has been accomplished in these things that they have done. People talk, you sit in a staff meeting, and you hear something that you want to disagree with, and you look at your eye buddy. You know what your eye buddy is? How many people here have an eye buddy in a staff meeting? All right? The eye buddy is the person that you sit across in a staff meeting, and when it's time to disagree, you go. But that is the start and the end of the action. There's never a verbal utterance after the eye buddy. And then step 2, after you find your eye buddy, the staff meeting now is over. Now you find your coalition. And now you know what your coalition is? The coalition now moves from the eye buddy to, can I talk to you? Can I talk to you? You got 5 minutes after the staff meeting. And then your coalition goes and regurgitates the entire staff meeting on their own. Who's picking up what I'm talking about right now? But when the coalition gets together, they are solving no problems whatsoever. They're just agreeing and making each other feel really good. They're in box number 1, but they're doing it in a small circle. So the ideas, the innovative and the creativity that's in that small coalition never gets back to the staff meeting. There's never a challenge. There's never an idea to increase our productivity, our efficiency, because the eye buddy and the coalition has already split off. And what does that do to us furthering our opportunity to win? The best minds are not bringing the best things up. The best ideas in the room that can be the person who's been in your organization 10 seconds is not going to speak up. Now take the staff meeting scenario and apply it to the 50 other times that you engage with human beings. And it'll show you how you can measure psychological safety. So for my eye buddies, I know it's going to be hard as you go forth. For my coalitions, I know you're going to have to meet in secrecy. But this is why creativity and innovation doesn't happen. So why did I spend all that time telling you about psychological safety, organizational culture, and how critical it is to me? So what's my story and why that's so important to me and why I dedicate my entire existence to growing culture? This isn't a retired Todd Simmons. I used to be called a pretty weird chief. I was security forces for most of my career. But for somehow in security forces, I would take an alternate approach to how I dealt with a human being. It doesn't mean that my career field was bad. It just means that my personal experience and trauma took me down a different road of how I dealt with human beings. So what's my story? I'm a husband. I'm a father of 2 girls who finally stopped asking me for money. I'm a former airman. I'm a former defender. But I'm also someone who's coming to the Air Force on a different path. See, we talk about this word resilience, and I talked to a group of AOCs and AMTs earlier about this word resilience. I'm a fan of the word resilience. I'm not a fan of how we operationalize in organizations across the world sometimes. Because resilience has to have a foundation, and that's why I just talked about psychological safety. Resilience has a lower opportunity of success. I can't tell you I'm having an issue. If you can't see that I'm having an issue, if you can't connect to my issue, then resilience is just a word that sits on top of a lot of other words. So for me, I was 18 years old, and I told you I retired as an Air University Command Chief, and I had a 33 entry score on the ASVAB. See, I know my Air Force recruiter. He's an SCS-1 in the Pentagon in the Space Force. And we only met 5 months ago after almost 30 years, because I wrote about him in my book. And in 1994, when he recruited me, there was a memo that says, do not recruit anyone under 50 ASVAB score in this region, because the Air Force did not have a recruiting issue, so they could be selective. My first ASVAB score was a 29. He studied with me to get a 33, which is one of the lowest scores you can do to enter the Air Force. When I came into the Air Force put me in a uniform, which meant I looked like everyone else. But what the Air Force didn't see is the backpack that I was carrying. The same backpack that all of you have that may have different weights in it. But for me, I had an undiagnosed learning disability. For me, I faced mental, physical abuse since I was 16 years old. For me, I knew how to take care of myself as a full adult when I was 10. For me, I already lost hope in humanity by the time I was 12 years old. For me, I dropped out of high school because I didn't see myself in anything. And if it wasn't for a French teacher and a staff sergeant from Nebraska, I would not be here today. A staff sergeant from Nebraska and a French teacher got together to get this kid to graduate and come into the United States Air Force. And when I walked in, everything you see in that backpack was what I was carrying. Again, if we don't connect, you don't know my weight. If we don't engage, you don't know my weight. So I told you I retired from Air University. What I didn't tell you was my first base, 10 February 1995. So my first base was my last. And the human being that showed up to that first base is not the human being that left that last base in 2019. I showed up with that backpack, and let me give you a little indication of my Air Force career up until that point. I went to BMT, scored the highest on my BMT test out of anyone in my BMT class. A kid with a learning disability, because I've learned for the first time that repetitive studying was what helped me. You may read a book in 2 hours, I may read a book in 20 hours. But in those 20 hours, I'm coming for you. And I learned that I actually could learn for the first time in my life. And a young TI Staff Sergeant Williams encouraged me. And I scored the highest in my BMT. And that was like winning the Olympics in Atlanta. The first time in my adult life at 18 years old that I wasn't stupid like they said I was. I wasn't useless like they said I was. Failed the 4th grade, you're dumb. Failed the 9th grade, you're dumb. Drop out of high school, you're dumb. I wasn't that person for the first time in my life. I forgot about my backpack. And I felt my shoulders were high, and I felt that I was now a man, and I was now somebody. And all they needed to do in tech school is put a yellow rope on me, and it told me that I was somebody. I get to be in charge of other 18-year-olds. I'm in charge. And I go through tech school, and again, graduate with high honors. I go to Air Base Ground Defense training at Fort Dix, New Jersey, high honors. Staff Sergeant Holmes from the United States Army gave me my best nickname at the time. He called me Airman Run Through a Wall because he threw me through one. It was an accident. We were doing mount training, and he kind of tossed me out the window by accident. Government equipment didn't sustain my weight. But every time anyone ever asked me to do anything at Fort Dix, I would do it. It doesn't matter what it was. We need someone to clean heavy weapons. I got it. We need someone to mop all the showers in the World War II moldy dorms that we were in. I got it. I was so committed to this institution that if anybody said anywhere in New Jersey that the Air Force wasn't good, they were probably not going to leave that bar without a bump on their head. I was sold. I had purpose. For the first time in my life, I was part of a team. I was connected. I was part of a culture that I believed in more than anything. And then I got to my first base with my service dress 10 February 1995, my 19th birthday. I was on Earth at that point, 19 summers. And I got to my first base, and back in 1995, they used to have something called Ambassador Elite Gate Guard Section, which you wore an ascot, you wore white shoestrings. You were highly selective. It was the first time that I realized being tall and skinny was going to benefit me in my career. And I went on the Ambassador Elite Gate Guard Section, and they had all of our names on the gate. We put this brown CE sign that said, "You're now being served by Airman Basic Todd Simmons." Boy, I'm somebody. Boy, culture was running through my veins. And then one day I heard leaders who I would die for said I wasn't worth anything. And they didn't know I was standing there because I was on the other side of the wall. And it crushed everything about me that I believed in. In 120 days from getting to my first base, I found myself with a government-issued weapon in my mouth with selector on fire. And if any of you understand pound per square inch, I was pushing this trigger down, and when I took my trigger out, my hand off the trigger, it bounced back. And I did that for 2 days. But preceding that, for 2 weeks, I never spoke a word in my organization. And no one ever said, "Why are you so quiet?" No one ever said, "Hey, what's going on?" All they said is, "Go to work." And this is not a knock on any organization or any discipline or anything, because I believe the institution of the Air Force has been strong since its inception. But there are people who don't understand how to build culture, how to sustain a profession of arms. And I just happened to run into 2 of them. But I will tell you, over 25 years, I can count on one hand of those people where I've run into. And I can give you the tens of thousands of great men and women that I've run into that are completely opposite. So this is not a knock on the institution. So how do you go from that, and how does trust save lives? Don't worry, I know some hearts started beating. We're not going to do this as an exercise. But when I pose this question second to the exercise that you just did, who is the most important person in your life? I want you to take 1 second and think about that. If I was to ask you, who is the most important person in your life? And by a raise of hands, who's ever been asked that question? No matter what audience it is, it's always a super minority of people who have done that, 5 or 6, 7. This question saved my life. On the 3rd day, when I had a day off and I had no access to weapons, I concocted a plan to go to the FAM camp in my 1985 Toyota Celica in Montgomery, Alabama, with no air conditioning in the summer. And I concocted a plan to go to the FAM camp with a lake where it was really nice, and I've been there a few times, and I was going to take my life. But prior to that, I needed to call my mom. But before that, someone asked me this question 120 days prior. When we in-process organizations, all of us remember, for the military folks in the room, we get the initials on this sheet of paper that says, "I'm here," all the sections, "I'm checking in." When I had that piece of paper, I went to my first sergeant, and he checked me in, and he put his initials on the paper, and I walked out, and he stopped me at the door, and he said, "Airman Simmons," and I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Who's the most important person in your life?" And I said, "My mom." And I'm going to tell you, at 19 years old, I could care zero about it. So I walked out the door, and I went and did my great job on the gate until this incident. And the night that I called my mom to tell her that I was going to kill myself, and the only person in my life at that point was my mom. Because my mom raised me by working 3 jobs. Because I wanted to play football, her 3rd job was working at Shoney's to afford my football. And that first sergeant had no idea of that. He just became curious and nosy. And every day he came through a gate that I was working, what do you think the first thing he said to me? "How's your mom?" "When is the last time you called your mom?" "Don't make me call your mom." I never told him anything else but that my mom was the most important person in my life. So I went to my phone booth, and when I called my mom to tell her goodbye, if for those of you in the room old enough to remember a phone booth and all you have to do is pull to get out of a phone booth, I was such in crisis I couldn't pull when it said P-U-L-L in my face. So I pushed. And when I pushed, I panicked. And when I panicked, I broke all the glass and all this glass, and I cut all my arms up. And at that moment, the only human being that could have walked through that front door was my first sergeant in the dorms, found a bloody kid. And he physically grabbed me and put me on the couch. And he said some words, and the words went, "How can I help you?" And because of that relationship and because I lost all trust prior, like a VCR tape, for those of you who remember those, I was rewinding every instant in my mind. And I remember this man cared about me enough to ask me a question about my mom, follow through, and be actionable to build a culture. And I let him help me. I let him help me, and he saved my life. And how he saved my life that day did not stop. I tell people I am very fortunate, I'm very blessed to live a decent life today. I'm healthy, I can stand on my own, I can see my kids. I survived a traumatic time in my life as a young man. I was able to do 25 years in a career. But I was only able to do that through the trust and safety of not only this first individual, but so many. And today I have a lot of great memories, a lot of great things, but nothing more important than a napkin. And this isn't the actual napkin. This is the Starbucks napkin because I couldn't get coffee. So I guess I'll just smell the napkin. But I wanted to ask you a little visual effects here. How much do you think a napkin costs? How many do you think Starbucks paid for this one napkin? It would take you a mathematical equation to fraction what one napkin in a bulk of 10 napkins costs. The most valuable thing that I own is not property. The most valuable thing that I own is not even memories. The most valuable things I own is not cars and vacations. The most valuable thing I own is this napkin that I won't bring out because I still have it. It's so fragile. See, that first sergeant took me and went to my treatment team meetings with me. He did what any leader in this room would do. He got me help for months. And I did not carry a weapon because I attempted suicide. But then he came up to me and asked me a question one day. He said, "Hey, Airman Simmons, do you want to deploy?" I said, "Absolutely, but you have to have a weapon to deploy." That's kind of a requirement in security forces. So he said, "I got it. I'm going to talk to the commander." My commander was an amazing major who allowed me to deploy 5 months after I tried to commit suicide. Would, of course, consult with the medical group and everything, and I got to go. So I deployed with my first sergeant and another airman to Khobar Towers, Saudi Arabia. And when I got there, my commander, we were on a 90-day deployment, and we thought back in the day that we were like deploying a long time in those 90-day deployments. And I got there, and he said he was going to be the maintenance group shirt, and I'm in security forces. But every day of break, that first sergeant showed up in a red F-150 and picked me up and took me to a Chinese restaurant in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia. And we did that about 8 to 9 times. To this day, I don't know why we only ate Chinese food, but when the food was free and you're 19, you go with it. But on the last day, he took out a napkin and he started writing. We were in this restaurant for over 2 hours, and he wrote 8 bases. And in the middle of those bases, he wrote Osan, Kunsan, and in parentheses, he said, "When you are mature." And I was a 19-year-old one-striper airman. I didn't know what he meant until I was a master sergeant at Osan, and I went, wise man for all of us who has done career tours. But he wrote these 8 bases, and he talked about them in length. He said, "This is Japan. This is what I experienced. This is Alaska. This is what I experienced." You're talking to a kid from Hardyville, South Carolina. The first time I've been on an airplane is when I went to BMT. The first time I visited a foreign country is when I went to Khobar Towers. First time I've seen anyone out of my community is when I went to MEPS. So you're talking to a kid whose life experience at this point wasn't a lot, and I was mesmerized. And I got back to Air University, and I filled out my dream sheet of assignments that I wanted to go to 1 year and a month and a half after I arrived at a base, tried to commit suicide, went on a 90-day deployment, essentially. I was leaving. I went to RAF Lakenheath as my first overseas assignment as an A1C. 17 years later, I came back to the United States as a senior master sergeant. As a senior airman, I made staff my first time, and my chief came to me and said, hey, we got an assignment for you. By name request, Ramstein Elite Guard, because you're tall and skinny. And I said, Chief, I can't go to Ramstein. He said, why you can't go to Ramstein? I said, because it's not on my napkin. And like any security forces chief of the 90s, he said, get out of my office. And if any of you have guessed where I went instead of going to Ramstein Elite Guard in the 90s that would have made anyone's career, I went to Alston Air Force Base, Alaska. I'm from the South where I wore shorts for Christmas. And I went to some place when I arrived in February that it was negative 60 degrees. You know why I went to that location? Because I had trust in a human being who did not look like me, who did not come from the cultural background that I came from, but all he did is show that he could care about another human being. And over the next 17 years, I only filled out my dream sheet from a napkin. 17 years. 17 years. And I close with, when is the last time you believe I spoke with that human being who we had an interaction that changed the rest of my life? When do you think the last time I spoke to him? Yesterday? Today? 17? What about you, Colonel? April 1996. That's the day I grabbed my stuff out of the dorms and got on a plane to head to Lakenheath. I don't know if he ever became a chief master sergeant. I don't know if he was even a good first sergeant. I don't even know if he's alive. But you know the one thing I do know? He had the credibility to change my life. He had the moral authority to change my life. And he probably will never know that. Just like all of you have been selected by someone at this point in your life, whether you're a 20-year-old cadet or you're at the upper ages in this room, someone silently has said, that is my person, from a conversation, from an interaction. Leadership is hard, but it's not impossible. Culture is extremely hard to build, but it's not impossible. It starts with one person, one idea, one connection. And I know I went a little bit over for Q&A, but I would close with, it is an honor to be Giovanna and Amari's dad. Because if it wasn't for a human being, I would never be able to say that up on this stage. And it's an honor to be Shannon Simmons' husband, someone who I met and married after 60 days of knowing her. 2 A1Cs and 28 years later. All because someone had the credibility to say that I see you and I see what you can do. And I'm honored to see all of you. So thank you.
Mr. Simmons, thank you today for your message. At this time, we would like to open the floor for any questions. Attendees can ask questions from the microphones positioned in the audience.
Mr. Simmons, thanks for taking my question. I think an obvious question would be, how do you foster that psychological safety? Because as a leader, I want people to speak up. I want those ideas, right? And so without all the ideas, everybody needs to feel included. So what advice would you offer?
I would, the same advice of the same type of question that I received for 2 straight days here. You have to start with you. And there's no brand in the world that's successful because they're inconsistent. They're only successful because of their level of consistency and accountability. So it will, as much as we want to see the change that we want to institute, as much as we're committed as a leader to the change that we want to institute, we got to make sure that we're setting an environment every day and actually take it yard by yard. You're not always going to throw 70-yard passes. You're not always going to have a team that's going to receive that. You got to be fighting for every yard. So what I would tell you is it starts with you being consistent every day, creating the environment every day, being steadfast in it, regardless if you think that is the measurement isn't moving. Because people will start picking up on that. People will start picking up on the one person who asked that question, which in their mind would have got everyone's heads cut off, and nobody reacted to it. So the next week, I'm going to ask a question. But that may not happen as fast as you may want it to happen. And as leaders, we have to be patient in the process. Because if we got that way, it didn't get that way overnight. So it's definitely not going to achieve the results we want overnight. So I would tell you, to build that organizational culture, you just have to be consistent every day. You have to, even regardless of, sometimes how tired you are, how busy you are. Your connections can't be a calendar invite. It can't say, go check on people. It has to be all day. It has to be in the parking lot. It has to be, I was about to say in the bathroom, a little weird, wait till at least they come outside. But it has to be in the Starbucks line. I asked some cadets yesterday. I'm sitting in the line, and I see 80,000 cadets in the line. And I'm like, whoever's in the front of you and whoever's in the back of you, by the time you actually get up there to get your mocha, boy, you should know something about the person in front of you and the person in back of you. If you have a 24 on your sleeve and you have a 24 on your sleeve, you're about to be operationally lieutenants in the United States Air Force. You better start building a network. You better start building your tribe that's going to take you all the way through the next 10 years of your career. So the short answer is consistency. Consistency. I wholeheartedly believe every human wants to be led. But every human also wants to be led by somebody they can see themselves in. And the more consistent you do at what you can do to build that culture, there'll be some people who come along. And you notice I said some people who come along. And you shouldn't measure who doesn't. Because now the more people you can sprinkle out, the better legacy you leave. I asked 483 chiefs on Monday in Maxwell when I was there. The first thing I asked them is, how do you want to be remembered? How do you want to be remembered as a leader? Is it for the technical proficiency that you gave to the organization, or is it for the legacy that you left for people to feel like they had a sense of purpose? And the second part of that, you only build that through being a consistent leader that they can remember how it felt to be you. Long answer, sir, and I don't even know if I answered your question.
Great stuff, for sure. You kind of spoke on it for most of the cadets. They're going to be moving and bouncing from base to base or from group to group, and they're going to enter into a culture maybe that they don't really love or enjoy or doesn't connect to them. For the community folks, we move from job to job, from tribe to tribe, whatever. What's your advice or nuggets when you're in that environment or that culture that you know you want to see change or at least improve? What advice do you give to somebody that sees it to then affect the change when you know that it's maybe above you to do so?
Great question. I don't even want to test this theory, and it probably would be a bad analogy. I would say I don't know anybody who can take a Granny Smith apple and eat it in one bite. But there may be someone in here just can do it. I don't know. But what I'm saying is we tend to try to control the whole apple. If I'm in charge of 2 people, I used to act like I was a squadron commander for those 2 people. I controlled the culture of what I can control under my control. When I was a tech sergeant in the Air Force Good Conduct Medal came back as a medal we issued our enlisted force. It had went away for years. And the rule changed when it came back that we will no longer present the Good Conduct Medal. Commanders had options to present it. My first Good Conduct Medal was issued by General Jumper. General John Jumper, Bosnia, gave me my first so emotional response to this medal means something to me. So when I go to my commander and I said, hey, are we going to issue the Good Conduct Medal in the next commander's call? The culture had already changed that we didn't value issuing it in commander's calls. What can I do as an E6 in the Air Force? Oh, that's what my commander said, so I'm going to walk away. I went to clothing sales and bought 4 Good Conduct Medals. I went to my computer and printed out 4 certificates. I went to my CSS and said, are these 4 airmen authorized a Good Conduct Medal? Yes, and I issued them to them. You change the culture where you're at, and you create those change agents to now become people who are willing to change the culture where they're at. But when we think about the whole apple, we never even get to anything. So the best advice I can have for anyone as a lieutenant, which I've told, you're a lieutenant and you're in charge first and foremost, but have humility to understand what you do and you don't know. And understand that you got to take one bite out of the apple every day to gain credibility, to gain the knowledge, to gain the foresight to be the leaders that we need to take us through the next thing. So my short answer is one bite, sir. And if you're in charge of one person, then you and that one person walk around like you are the 4,000 people at the academy. You talk to your one person like you're talking to the whole squadron. This is what we're going to do. This is our strategy. This is where we're going to change this for the better. You talk about it like it's this, because it is. Because you are not only controlling that one person's view of what change is, other people are watching. And everybody wants to play for the winning team. Everyone wants to be Alabama. All right?
Roll time. Mr. Simmons, thank you again for your time today. Your experiences and perspectives speaks to how we can reimagine, embrace culture, and empower people. On behalf of the United States Air Force Academy and our National Character and Leadership Symposium, please accept this token of our gratitude. The base of this gift, The base of this gift is made from marble from our terrazzo. It is significant to us all because cadets have to run the marble strips during our freshman year. We hope that you'll look on this and remember your NCLS experience fondly.